It's a celebration of America's freedom. Welcome to the Marc Scaringi Show. The Marc Scaringi Show is your place for a weekly discussion on making America great again. The important political and legal issues of the day, a celebration of the Constitution, and traditional American values. Marc is a practicing attorney, a former senatorial candidate, a Donald J. Trump-endorsed delegate, and a defender of the Constitution. His goal? To put America first. And now, celebrating America's freedoms, here's attorney Marc Scaringi.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Marc Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And thanks for tuning in on WHP 580 AM and iHeartRadio. If you'd like to watch prior podcasts of the show or read any of my columns on Penn Live or take a look at some great merchandise, including our very popular Right to Bear Arms muscle shirt and the We're Glad You're Our Neighbor, Just Please Don't Kill Us yard signs, go to the marcscaringishow.com website and you can see it all there. And it's just in time for the Christmas and the holiday season. You can order gifts for your friends and family right from the marcscaringishow.com website. For more political and legal news throughout the course of the week, don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Well, the impeachment inquiry has moved from the House Intelligence Committee to the Judiciary Committee, from Adam Schiff to Jerry Nadler presiding. In the first day of the Judiciary Committee, we heard from 4 law professors opining on the law of impeachment. 3 professors chosen by the Democrats and 1 chosen by Republicans. Fair and balanced? Well, of course not. Just do the math. The Democrats control the committee, so they stacked the deck against Republicans and the president. And at the conclusion of the testimony provided by the 4 law professors, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said on Thursday that the House Judiciary Committee will begin drafting articles of impeachment against President Donald Trump. Pelosi said, "The president's actions have seriously violated the Constitution. Our democracy is at stake. The president leaves us no choice but to act." In her statement, she also said, "The president has engaged in abuse of power, undermining our national security and jeopardizing the integrity of our elections." Really? Abuse of power, Speaker Pelosi? By the way, what is that? What is abuse of power? Is that a crime? Where in the Crimes Code can I find a definition for abuse of power? The fact is, you can't. It doesn't exist. It's just a made-up crime. So the very words spoken by Democratic Speaker of the House as the reason for the impeachment of this president is that he engaged in abuse of power, whatever that means, which is not a crime. So this will be the first impeachment of a president that does not involve a crime. In the Johnson, Nixon, and Clinton impeachment, the articles of impeachment all listed actual crimes as grounds for the impeachment. Now, in the Johnson impeachment, they made up a crime, but it was in the text of the bill, the act of Congress, that they accused President Johnson of violating the Tenure of Office Act. But in all prior presidential impeachment cases, the articles of impeachments all included actual crimes, statutory crimes under the Federal Crimes Code. With the exception of Johnson, there was no Federal Crimes Code. It was a crime, though, in the text of the act they claim he violated. So President Trump will be the first president impeached for a non-crime. And also about Speaker Pelosi's statement, she said that Trump undermined our national security. One wonders, well, how? Now, she doesn't explain. That statement, her statement, is absurd on its face. If anything, the delivery of U.S. military aid to Ukraine so that it can fight Russian-backed separatists over disputed territory actually endangers United States national security interest because it brings us closer to war with Russia. But those facts and the reality on the ground in Ukraine are lost on Speaker Pelosi. So she says the president is undermining our national security. And as we've talked about that in prior shows, whenever a politician starts to talk about how another politician is undermining U.S. national security, be very wary, be suspicious of that, because that seems to be the cloak that every politician surrounds himself with to accuse another of violating in order to get that politician's way. And in this case, the Democrats, led by Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, and it's also been uttered many times by Adam Schiff, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee that conducted the actual impeachment inquiry hearings, they frequently will talk about how the president is undermining our national security. And not one reporter follows up by saying, how is putting a pause on military aid to Ukraine endangering the American people? It's absurd. It's nonsensical, but that's what the Democrats say and use as justification for this impeachment of this president. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, in her press conference to announce that she's calling upon the House Judiciary Committee to draft articles of impeachment, also accused the president of jeopardizing the integrity of our elections. Well, what does that even mean? Well, integrity is defined as the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles, moral uprightness. So what U.S. elections have been made dishonest or immoral by President Trump asking the Ukrainian president to investigate the Biden family for credible allegations of corruption? Has that made our election immoral or dishonest? No. In fact, it's made if the Ukrainians actually carry out the investigation, it will make our elections more honest, more moral, if you will, because then we'll know whether or not our former Vice President Joe Biden and one of the contenders for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2020 actually committed acts of corruption. The American people need to know and should know one way or another. There are certainly credible allegations. No reasonable person could deny that. Former Vice President Joe Biden at the time was vice president. He was appointed by Barack Obama to be the point person in U.S.-Ukrainian relations. Ukraine is one of the most corrupt countries in the world. U.S. foreign policy was devoted to rooting out corruption in Ukraine. At that very time, Joe Biden's son Hunter became a board member of Burisma, the natural gas the largest natural gas company in Ukraine, and there were very credible allegations of corruption involving the founder and owner of Burisma, who would have been Hunter Biden's boss, who was Hunter Biden's boss. And Burisma was paying Hunter Biden's company $83,000 a month for a no-show job. Hunter Biden didn't speak Ukrainian, didn't have any experience in natural gas, and news reports indicate never even went to Ukraine. He never even appeared in Ukraine, never even appeared physically in person at any of these board meetings. Yet he was on the board for many years, making massive amounts of money. The owner and founder of Burisma was the former cabinet official in the Ukrainian government that was in charge of what? Granting or denying permits to natural gas companies. Well, which natural gas company do you think he gave the permits to? Oh, Burisma. There we go. That's called corruption. And Hunter Biden was on the board of governors, meaning he's in charge. He has fiduciary duties and obligations to govern that company. Those are credible allegations of corruption. The American people need to know whether or not their former Vice President Joe Biden, when he instructed the Ukrainians to fire the prosecutor who was investigating Burisma and Hunter Biden, was corrupt. More about this when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Marc Scaringi Show.
Now, more of Marc Scaringi on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to The Marc Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is the place where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And we're talking about the impeachment hearings in Washington, D.C., in our nation's capital, and how just recently Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi held a press conference and announced she's instructing the chairman of the Judiciary Committee to draft articles of impeachment to impeach the President of the United States. Now, in this press conference, Pelosi, well, she stated the President's actions have seriously violated the Constitution, and then, of course, does not name any constitutional provisions the President violated. And then she said our democracy is at stake. And, of course, we don't have a democracy, we have a republic. She then stated the President leaves us no choice but to act. Well, you have the choice not to act because there are no grounds for impeachment. And then she says the President has engaged in abuse of power, undermining our national security and jeopardizing the integrity of our elections. And, of course, abuse of power is not a crime. Pelosi did not define what she meant by abuse of power. The President is certainly not endangering our national security. There's no evidence or there's no evidence to support that. It's ridiculous. The United States giving military aid to Ukraine only enhances that's what endangers U.S. national security, because it gets us closer to a war with Russia. We're essentially in a proxy war with Russia now. If they're arming the Russian separatists and we're arming the Ukrainian government soldiers, that's not good for the national security interests of the American people. These proxy wars can turn into hot wars, and that's what gets American soldiers killed, and that's what we want to stay out of. And then thirdly, Pelosi says that the President has undermined or has jeopardized the integrity of our elections. And we're pointing out here today how actually asking the Ukrainian president to investigate credible allegations of corruption involving the Biden family will, on the contrary, enhance the integrity of U.S. elections. Integrity is defined as the quality of honesty or being moral. So we need to know whether or not Joe Biden was immoral and dishonest in the conduct of his office of vice president when he told the then Ukrainian president to fire the prosecutor who was investigating the company Burisma, on whose board his son Hunter Biden sat and got $83,000 a month. So we are kind of disputing the statements of Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi in her announcement that she is instructing the House to draft articles of impeachment. Now, Pelosi, in her statement and in her prior appearances and press conferences, frequently uses the word somber. That she's describing what the Democrats are doing as very somber. She went on one of the nightly talk shows, Stephen Colbert's show, and she laughed and giggled and joked throughout the show, and intermittently then said, "Oh no, this is grave and somber." So no one believes her. This is a political stunt that the Democrats are doing to placate the left wing of the party and to try to damage this president as much as they can moving into the 2020 presidential elections. But it will backfire, as we've discussed on this show previously, and as I've written in my columns in Penn Live. I've predicted the Senate, of course, will dismiss or acquit. That's not a very tough prediction. But also I've predicted the Democrats will lose the presidency and the House because of this impeachment charade. It's turning swing and independent voters against the Democrats, and it will certainly get out the vote of Republicans and conservatives. And by the way, that's it, apparently, with the hearings in the Judiciary Committee. In fact, there were no hearings in the Judiciary Committee. Hearings are called to gather facts from fact witnesses under oath. That's not what happened when the four law professors, quote, testified, end quote. They were basically presenting what's called oral argument. They weren't fact witnesses. In fact, one of the Republican congressmen asked them to raise their hand if they had any direct factual testimony to provide concerning any of the allegations involving the president, and none of them raised their hand. And by the way, the Democratic law professors did not confine themselves to the alleged facts in the 300-page House Intelligence Committee report. They introduced their own facts, and we'll discuss this in a moment. And by the way, when you're an attorney presenting oral argument or a closing statement, you must confine yourself to the facts. You just can't make up your own, which is exactly what the Democratic law professors did before the House Judiciary Committee. Now, what about these law professors? The Democrats presented Stanford Law School professor Susan Carlin. Now, Professor Carlin has a history of anti-Trump statements, and of course, in this modern era, she has anti-Trump feelings. In 2017, she appeared on a panel organized by the American Constitution Society, featuring the never-Trumper Bill Kristol, who was the founder of the now-defunct news magazine The Weekly Standard that had attacked then-candidate Trump. It was moderated by the liberal Washington Post columnist and deputy editorial editor Ruth Marcus. Now, during the panel discussion, Professor Carlin, the Democrats' star witness in favor of impeaching this president, made the outlandish claim that Donald Trump has sexually assaulted more women than 99.99% of all the people who have entered the U.S. illegally. She, of course, presented no facts to substantiate this incredibly disparaging and defamatory statement. Yet facts don't seem to matter to the good professor. She mocked Trump for his comments about former U.S. Senator John McCain and, of course, the notorious Access Hollywood tapes about grabbing women. The professor was triggered by such language, and that obviously affected her ability to ascertain the facts and apply the facts reasonably and rationally to the law of impeachment, as we'll discuss in a moment. Now, during that same conference, the Democrats' star witness law professor in favor of impeaching the president said she had, when she came to Washington, D.C., she had to cross the street instead of walking along the sidewalk in front of the Trump International Hotel. Apparently, walking near a Trump building would have triggered the good professor. This is the type of person the Democrats put up to support their claim and cause for impeaching this president. Now, I'll point out one comment from Professor Carlin's Judiciary Committee testimony on impeachment. She presented an analogy. She said, and I paraphrase, imagine you live in Texas and it's devastated by hurricanes and flooding. The governor called the president and asked for immediate disaster aid that Congress has already appropriated. And imagine the president said, I would like you to do us a favor. I'll meet with you and I'll send the disaster relief once you brand my opponent a criminal. Professor Carlin continued her analogy and said, wouldn't you know it in your gut that such a president has abused his office, that he betrayed the national interest, and that he was trying to corrupt the electoral process? Professor Carlin went on to say, I believe the evidentiary record shows wrongful acts on that scale here. This is the Democratic law professor testifying before the House Judiciary Committee. She claimed that there's an evidentiary record, that her analogy presented an evidentiary record similar to the one before the committee. But that's totally false. President Trump did not condition the delivery of the aid or a White House meeting on the Ukrainian president doing anything. The president's on record saying he wants nothing from President Zelensky in exchange for the aid. Also, the president did not ask the Ukrainians to brand Joe Biden a criminal. That's false. Trump asked the Ukrainian president to look into credible allegations of corruption concerning the Biden family in Ukraine. And how did Trump betray the national interest in pausing aid to Ukraine? That's in Ukraine's national interest to get the money. It's not in our national interest. We're giving up the money. That hurts us financially. We want it's our money. I mean, this is ridiculous. And as we've discussed, the U.S. has no national interest at stake in Ukraine and who controls Crimea or the Donbass. And how was Trump trying to corrupt the electoral process by asking the Ukrainians to investigate credible allegations of corruption? So any Democrat running for his party or her party's nomination to challenge President Trump in 2020 is immune from investigation? They're above the law? They get a get-out-of-jail-free card? That's absurd. And this comes from a allegedly distinguished law professor. We'll talk more about Professor Carlin and the other law professors in the legal arguments they present for or against impeachment of President Trump. When we return from this brief commercial break, you're listening to The Marc Scaringi Show.
Let's get back to the Marc Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to The Marc Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. We're talking about the impeachment inquiry into the President of the United States, the testimony of the 4 law professors, 3 chosen by Democrats, 1 chosen by Republican, not very fair and balanced from the start, and how House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, at the conclusion of the testimony of the law professors, announced that she's instructing the House Judiciary Committee to draft articles of impeachment. And we're getting into the testimony provided by the law professor, the law professor from Stanford University, Pamela Carlin is her name, and I'm sorry, is it Susan Carlin? Professor Carlin. Well, we'll just call her Professor Carlin. And we're talking about the testimony that she gave and how she presented an analogy. And, of course, the analogy was totally false and did not apply to the facts of the case before her. So one must wonder, why is the professor arguing from analogy? The analogy doesn't fit the facts of the case, so the analogy is inapt. But why would anyone argue from analogy when they have the facts? That's because she could not argue the actual facts of the case, because the actual facts of the case show the president committed no crime, let alone a high crime or misdemeanor. So she makes up facts about a hurricane in Texas and a fake conversation between a Texas governor and President Trump that never happened. And she had the president saying what he did not say in real life. She has the telephone transcript of Trump's call. Trump didn't ask President Zelensky to brand Joe Biden a criminal. That's a lie. Yet in Professor Carlin's analogy, that's what she says Trump said. What is that but a lie? The professor's making up a false analogy and lying about what President Trump actually said in order to make her point for impeachment. Really, she should be sanctioned by whatever disciplinary board is in charge of her law license or condemned by the American Bar Association. Of course, that will never happen, not in a million years. But, if you're an attorney and you're in court and you're arguing a case, you can't falsify facts. You can't falsify statements made by your client or the opposing party. You get in real trouble if you do that. But yet that's what Professor Carlin's testimony was. This is an outrage for anybody who believes in the law or the rule of law. Yet, of course, she's being trumpeted as a hero among the left, and that includes the American Bar Association and others. Now, this same law professor, Professor Carlin, she had to apologize during her testimony for invoking President Trump's 13-year-old son, Barron Trump, to criticize the president during the House Judiciary Committee's hearing. In her testimony, she declared the president can name his son Barron, but can't make him a baron. Well, why did she say that? That's entirely irrelevant. How is bestowing titles of nobility relevant to the impeachment inquiry? It's not. The president's not being impeached for violating the constitutional clause prohibiting the bestowing of titles of nobility. So again, it's another false, fake analogy. She has the actual facts in front of her. She has a 300-page report from the House Intelligence Committee, but she chooses not to argue those facts. Instead, she makes stuff up. And how about her? How about in her apology for bringing in the president's 13-year-old son when it's totally irrelevant, that she hopes the president apologizes for his past actions? She can't even apologize correctly. I mean, what a child. Isn't that what children do? You know, when your child does something wrong and you finally convince your son or daughter to apologize, and he or she apologizes, but then says, well, her sister or brother should apologize too. That's what children do. This is a distinguished law professor who is advocating for the impeachment of a sitting U.S. president, and she's attacking his 13-year-old child in the process of doing so. Or not attacking, but bringing him in to the impeachment inquiry, invading his privacy, and bringing him into one of the most controversial issue confronting our country today. That's not fair to that child, and that's not right, and that's not relevant. And she's just upset. She reveals she has a childlike brain and the thought process of a child, and she's upset. And Trump is being impeached basically for saying mean things. That's really what Professor Carlin's testimony, if you dig into it, is all about. I mean, she was also visibly angry in her opening statement. She accused Ranking Member Doug Collins, Republican from Georgia, of having claimed that she and other witnesses had not read the transcripts of testimony or the reports in the House impeachment inquiry. She said, "Here, Mr. Collins, I would like to say to you, sir, that I read the transcripts of every one of the witnesses who appeared in the live hearing, because I would not speak about these things without reviewing the facts. So I'm insulted by the suggestion that as a law professor, I don't care about those facts." Liberals went wild on social media. Now remember, Professor Carlin used an analogy of false facts that she manufactured to support her claim that the president should be impeached. Now she's saying that she cares about the facts, and she's attacking a Republican congressman. And by the way, Congressman Collins never accused her of not reading the transcripts. He specifically said that he doubted whether the witnesses had the time to digest them. He's talking about the House Intelligence Committee's 300-page report, which Chairman Adam Schiff had only released the day before, less than 24 hours before the Judiciary Committee hearing on the report. So the professor misheard what Congressman Collins said and then admonished him for saying what she misheard. If she misheard what Congressman Collins said right in front of her a few seconds ago, how do you think she could have digested the 300-page House Intelligence Committee report that was released less than 24 hours before she testified? I wonder if she slept within those past 24 hours. Did she eat? Did she travel from California to Washington, D.C. within those past 24 hours? Can you digest a 300-page report in less than 24 hours and do so to the point you're able to provide a legal opinion on the constitutionality of the impeachment of a sitting U.S. president? That's quite a feat. That's a pretty tough job. That's what Republican Congressman Doug Collins was talking about. He was making the point how unfair it was for the Democrats in control of the impeachment process to publish the report, 300-page report, and give the law professors less than 24 hours to read and digest it and then opine on it. She misheard him and admonished him for that. If she misheard him and misunderstood what he was saying when he said it right in front of her, I wonder if she misheard or misinterpreted or misconstrued anything in that 300-page report. I would say so, because a lot of her testimony, she just made up analogies. And by the way, I wonder if Professor Carlin has any bias against the president. Do you think so? She can't walk in front or buy a Trump property without getting distressed. She can't do it. She's triggered by the president's language. The fact that he said that John McCain was not a hero, that he doesn't like heroes who get caught. That triggered this liberal law professor who's now testifying that this president should be impeached. She is also on record saying liberals tend to cluster more. Conservatives, especially very conservative people, tend to spread out more, perhaps because they don't even want to be around themselves. Here is the Democrat star constitutional law scholar calling half of America the kind of people who don't even want to be around each other. Conservatives don't even like each other enough to live by each other. Professor Carlin is channeling Hillary Clinton with her deplorables and irredeemables comment. So I guess according to the Democrats' impeachment witness, we conservatives are so mean and nasty, we don't even want to be around each other. More on this after this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Marc Scaringi Show.
Now, more of Marc Scaringi on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to The Marc Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. We're talking about the House Judiciary Committee's impeachment testimony provided by 4 law professors, 3 chosen by Democrats, 1 chosen by Republicans. We're doing the math, and we're concluding that doesn't sound very fair. And we're going through the extreme liberal bias of the Professor Carlin and how many statements she's made in the past about how she's triggered by everything Trump. She can't even walk in front of a Trump building. She has to cross the street out of fear of being triggered then. And how her testimony, in support of her claim that the president should be impeached, she made up an analogy with fake facts and said that the president said things that the record reflects he didn't, and how one scratches one's head and wonders how a law professor can render an opinion based upon not the facts of the record before her, but the facts she just makes up. It's remarkable to me, but that's what we heard from Professor Carlin. Now, we also heard from a law professor chosen by Republicans, only one, and that was Professor Jonathan Turley. And I think Professor Turley did an outstanding job. In short, Professor Turley opined President Trump's actions toward Ukraine did not constitute bribery, and resisting congressional request that White House officials testify before Congress is not obstruction. So Professor Turley is saying that the Democrats did not prove the president committed treason, bribery, or high crimes or misdemeanors. Now, on bribery, Dems are only half-heartedly arguing bribery. They cannot make out the elements for bribery under the Federal Crimes Code. First, the president of Ukraine is not a U.S. public official, so any bribery criminal statute, the bribery criminal statute doesn't apply at all. So Dems then argue the president should be impeached under common law bribery that was in existence at the time of the framing of the Constitution. Now, this is great. For the first time, our liberal Democratic friends are arguing original intent, that the Constitution should be construed as it was intended by the framers and ratifiers to be construed, and that the words of the Constitution should be defined in the manner in which they were defined by the framers and ratifiers. Here we finally have the liberal Democrats agreeing with conservatives who believe that the Constitution should be interpreted as it was written and intended by the framers. But aren't those just a bunch of old white men enslavers like Jefferson and Madison? Yet we have our liberal Democrat friends saying that the way they define bribery should be the way the House Judiciary Committee defines it today, to impeach the president. Well, interestingly, all of these common law crimes, including the common law crime of bribery, has been abolished in this country by act of Congress. So even though Congress has abolished the common law crime of bribery, Congress wants to use it to impeach this president. Ironic? Yes. Hypocritical? Yes. Well, in any event, whatever the president did does not rise to the level of bribery as it was defined during the time of our framing. Common law bribery was limited to actual acceptance of money from someone seeking favorable treatment or policy from a public official. Trump did not ask for or receive money in exchange for granting the Ukrainians a meeting or delivering the military aid to them. So even under the Democrats' newfound interpretation of bribery, which is actually what they're saying is the way it was defined by the framers, it in fact was not. And I love the fact that the Congress itself abolished common law bribery, but now wants to use it to impeach this president. So that's why I say the Democrats are really only half-heartedly using bribery. They know they can't use it. It's not the president didn't commit bribery under the statute that exists today, nor did the president commit bribery as it was defined in the common law at the time of the framing and ratifying of the Constitution. And that's why when you hear Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi have a press conference and announce that she's instructing the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee to draft articles of impeachment, she uses the term abuse of power, which of course is not a crime. I don't even know what it is. She doesn't use the word bribery because she knows they can't prove it. But Professor Turley got onto something that is it's very important to understand. And Professor Turley, not only did he talk about how it's a dangerous thing to take a crime like bribery and expand it so as to include questionable and even non-criminal conduct. And by the way, liberals and libertarians are supposed to be those who champion the rights of the accused. Yet now we have liberals expanding the definition of bribery so as to include non-criminal conduct in order to impeach a Republican president. Ironic? Yes. Hypocritical? Yes. But getting back to the other point that I wanted to make, and that is this. Democrats in their articles of impeachment will put something together in the nature of obstruction of Congress. You've heard Democrats talk about that a lot. Of course, there is no crime called obstruction of Congress. But they'll get to there is a criminal statute in the Crimes Code that gets close to what Democrats are saying, but they have to show that the president corruptly or by threats of force or by threatening letter or communication influenced, obstructed, or impeded or tried to influence, obstruct, or impede the Congress in its official proceeding. Now, I don't want to get into the weeds too much here. I just want to leave you with one point, and that is this. The House Intelligence Committee did not issue subpoenas to the high-ranking members of the White House. Now, I should say the House Democrats did subpoena some Trump officials like Mike Pompeo and Mike Mulvaney, but when those men refused, citing executive privilege, Democrats refused to seek a court order to enforce those subpoenas. Democrats didn't want to give Republicans their day in court. The Democrats did not subpoena, for example, former National Security Advisor John Bolton, who had a lot to say about the Ukraine matter. Now, the White House did, clearly, not cooperate voluntarily because it wanted to assert its rights to executive privilege. Remember, the president, through his attorney, Pat Cipollone, as we say in Italian, sent that letter to Adam Schiff and the House Intelligence Committee and said, look, we're not going to be cooperating with your impeachment inquiry. We think it's unconstitutional. So we're not going to be sending over White House advisors to attend and testify. That is the legal prerogative of the White House and the president. He has every right to put forth his position that he's not going to voluntarily cooperate with the House impeachment inquiry. Now, what the Democrats should have done is they should have issued subpoenas to those White House individuals whom they wanted to attend and testify. And what would the White House have done? It would have filed motions to quash the subpoenas. It would have filed those motions, obviously, in a court. In a court, the judiciary, the judicial branch, would decide this dispute between the executive and the legislative branch. That's the way our Constitution is set up. That's the American Republic. 3 separate branches of government with checks and balances. And the judiciary, the judicial branch, the third branch of government, it decides the disputes between the first and the second. But the Democrats didn't do that. They didn't subpoena these White House officials because they didn't want the issue to end up in the courts. They complained that would take too long. Why? It interfered in their own party's presidential nomination contest. That's it. I mean, that is remarkable. The Democrat committee chairman running the impeachment inquiry refused to subpoena White House advisors who had said they weren't going to voluntarily attend and testify because it interfered in the Democratic Party's presidential nomination contest because the court battle would take too long. Think about that. That is horrifying. I mean, that's an abuse of. And by the way, the Democrats are now going to charge in an article of impeachment something called abuse of Congress for the president exercising his right not to voluntarily comply with their invitation to attend and testify, which is itself not compulsory. This is a travesty of justice. And that's why Professor Turley was right on target when he said it's the Congress itself that is abusing its own power in this impeachment battle with President Trump. Well, that's about all the time we have today for the Marc Scaringi Show. I want to thank you for tuning in and listening. Tune in every Saturday at 1 o'clock to hear about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first.